When B&M introduced the inverted coaster in 1992, the amusement industry was turned upside down. This is the model that introduced the world to B&M and to what Walter Bouleguer and Claude Mabillard were capable of. The inverted coaster introduced new elements, such as the zero-G roll, which has become a standard inversion and a favorite of many, including myself. It has since been adopted by tons of other companies, including Intamin, Vekoma, and of course RMC. In a short span of time, we would see many new custom layouts, as well as the ever-present Batman clones. Today, let's talk about the best inversions on each B&M inverted coaster. Let's start out with the first inverted layout ever created by B&M, Batman the Ride at Six Flags Great America. I'm lumping all of the Batman clones here together since they feature the same layout, although some are mirrored. Some run a little differently than others as well. For example, the one at Six Flags St. Louis is very smooth, but feels a little slow. This is the most intense invert layout I've ever experienced. A super compact, fast-paced mess of track that pulls intense positive Gs. This was a tough one to decide. The second loop is very tight and snappy, but I have to give it to the wingovers at the end. These are very similar to a standard corkscrew, but profiled with more positive Gs and snap at the top. It's amazing to me that these ride so smooth without any headbanging. B&M really nailed it with their first invert, but they would still improve and refine their layouts throughout the 90s. Next up is Flight Deck at California's Great America. This is the first inverted custom layout ever produced by B&M. It's a short ride but doesn't waste a foot of track. The winner here is once again the wingover. Like the Batman clones, this inversion is forceful and snappy and leads into a low-to-the-ground turn right over the water, which makes for a fantastic sequence. To me, how the inversions interact with the rest of the layout is as important as the elements themselves. One quirk I really love about this ride is that you can feel and see the roll functions in the track work exiting the wingover. After the snap at the top, it stalls at the same angle for just a second before leveling out and then banking left. It's imperfections like this that I just love and really make the early B&Ms feel alive and almost out of control. Coming in next is Raptor at Cedar Point. Raptor was the first large-scale invert opening in 1994. This is the first coaster to feature the newer profiled wingovers that we just typically call corkscrews these days. While still whippy, they're profiled a little more in line with a less pronounced snap at the top. The Cobra roll is very aggressive without being painful, but I have to give it to the zero-G roll. This was the best profiled zero-G roll on the inverted coasters at that time. You approach it slightly banked to the left, and then whip clockwise in a smooth, forceful heartline roll. A perfect example of a 90s inverted zero-G roll. One of my favorite videos, and I'll link down below, is a video of Claude Mabillard riding Raptor, laughing his head off going through this inversion. That's pretty much how I am every time I ride this coaster. Raptor seems to be one of the more controversial inverts out there, but it's definitely one of my favorites. This ride has so much character. Here comes the legendary Montu. This 7-inversion trench diving powerhouse of a coaster is one of the most famous of all the inverts, and for good reason. Few inverts can match the length, intensity, and sheer amount of time spent underground, bringing even more speed available from its 150-foot drop. Montu was the first B&M to introduce the Immelmann, a maneuver credited to German World War I pilot Max Immelmann. This coaster was also the first from B&M to perfect an element that aerodynamics had been using for years, the batwing. This is the inversion that, no surprise, I'm choosing for Montu. This has to be the most aggressive, positive G element ever devised on a modern coaster. If you are sitting in the back left seat, you get absolutely yanked into the inversion at breakneck speed, being pushed into your seat both down and back, then holding those positive G-forces all throughout a trench until rising up into the exit of the element. It's an absolutely breathtaking element. A quirk that I love about Montu's batwing is each side is not a perfect mirror of the other. The entrance side has a significantly tighter crest than the exit side, which contributes to the powerful start of this inversion. Let's talk about the tallest invert ever to be built by B&M. Alpengeist is a massive, and it looks even more impressive when you're standing by the water looking up at that Cobra roll. The sense of speed on this coaster is rare on an invert, and you really feel it at the bottom of the first drop. You just keep twisting and picking up speed, and it feels incredibly fast. I found it really hard to pick out the best inversion on Alpengeist. The Cobra roll is controversial, blurring the line between a rough transition and a whippy element. The two rolls after the mid-course are pretty underwhelming when the mid-course slows you down so much. The vertical loop is forceful but relatively standard. It's not by a long shot, but I'm choosing the Immelmann. Being the first inversion after a massive drop, you go into it with a ton of speed, and leading up to it you pass over the roof of a shed with some snow theming and skis, which makes it look like you're coming off a jump as you climb into the Immelmann. This is the largest Immelmann on an invert, and feels oversized if you've ridden a lot of the other inverts. It's a great inversion to follow that fantastic first drop, which, in my opinion, is the best part of Alpengeist. Have you ever heard the story of the Great Bear? And a mighty bear he is. Great Bear has a lot of unique and interesting elements, from the famous helix off the lift to the drop, which you take with some decent speed, and of course, the meander into the brakes. I said interesting, not great. However, this invert does have some great moments, but none can come close to the 0G roll. This is one of the whippiest 0G rolls I have ever experienced, on par with Raptor, which already makes it great, but you also seem to have more speed traveling through it, which amps up the experience. Pair this with some float, and this is without a doubt one of, if not the best 0G rolls I have ever experienced. Up next is Afterburn. This invert is very popular among enthusiasts. It barely has any track not dedicated to inversions, and there are 6 to choose from. And for me, it's no contest which is the best. Afterburn is one of only 2 inverts to feature the Batwing element. While not as compact as Montu's Batwing, this one still delivers plenty of whip and forces in the back. The bottom of the element dives through Carowin's second entrance, which provides a cool visual from off-ride. I'd also like to give an honorable mention to the corkscrew at the end of this ride. That thing is insane. The exit of the corkscrew is lower than the entrance, giving an insane amount of whip in the back, and also delivering a bit of headbanging. Afterburn is a very powerful ride, and also has a very fitting theme as well. The next invert to discuss is Talon. I've been riding this coaster for almost 20 years now, and I've ridden it literally thousands of times. I have a better feel for this coaster than any other. Talon has a very solid vertical loop with some whip in the back, a relatively whippy and simultaneously floaty 0G roll, a whippy and very smooth corkscrew, but my favorite inversion on the ride is the Immelmann. I've never experienced another Immelmann that feels like this one. Most Immelmanns slowly roll out at the apex to the side, such as Montu's, Afterburns, or Alpengeist. Talon, on the other hand, leaves you simultaneously floating and whipping back upright. The best way I can describe it is by saying it's a half loop followed by the second half of a 0G roll. If you are sitting in the back left, your legs will be whipped out to the side as you suddenly go from inverted to upright, all while floating out of your seat. In the back right, it feels like you are rotating in place due to being on the inside of the curve, outside of the heart lining. It's a shame B&M hasn't typically made their Immelmanns like this. Instead, most are kind of forgettable, sadly. And now we have our second California invert, Silver Bullet. This coaster is an icon for Knott's Berry Farm, with its Cobra roll integrated into the entrance experience. It has an interesting sequence of elements, with an even more interesting flow between them. I think the best inversion, or should I say inversions, are the 2 corkscrews at the end of the ride. The inversions themselves are solid, but the way you transition between them is why I picked them. You start with a counterclockwise corkscrew that continues banking up to 90 degrees as you exit the element, and reversing direction into a clockwise corkscrew, and then into the upward helix. This sequence of elements flows so well, and I'm not sure why more people don't talk about it. Up next is an invert that was on my bucket list for a very long time due to its apparent similarities in the first half to Talon, and while writing this script I finally made it out to Worlds of Fun to ride it. And ride it I did many times. I got a really good feel for it, and I have to say, it rides nothing like Talon despite looking like it. In the future I'd like to do a full comparison video getting into the nitty-gritty, but for now I'll just say that Patriot doesn't feature any whippy or forceful elements. The closest you'll get is the corkscrew, which is the inversion I'm picking. I know a lot of people like the 0G roll, but I didn't get a whole lot out of it. I didn't really get a whole lot of float and 0 whip, so for me it kind of fell flat. The corkscrew is the one element most similar to the earlier inverts, which is why I picked it. Patriot was built at a time when B&M was dialing back a lot of their coasters, presumably to make them more approachable, but in my opinion they went way past that to the point of neutering them. That being said, it's still a fun ride, but having ridden the other inverts, I found it to be a little saddening. And lastly, we have the newest invert in North America, the longest one in the world, Banshee. This ride has grown on me over time. Like Patriot, it doesn't feature any whippy inversions, but it does make up for it to some extent with its sustained positive G-forces and sense of speed. I found it hard to pick out a standout inversion because most of them feel very similar. I went back and forth between the inline twist and the pretzel knot, and while my opinion may change in the future, I'm going with the pretzel knot. The bottom of this element features sustained positive Gs combined with a sense of speed, which is pretty much Banshee's theme. In fact, the bottom of the pretzel knot is the point of the layout where it hits its top speed of 68 miles per hour. This invert really shines in the front row, and I recommend trying it out when you visit Kings Island. Anyway, that wraps up our list. B&M Inverts are one of my favorite all-time roller coaster models, and they've made some fantastic ones over the years. If you like this video and want to see more, definitely consider subscribing, and check out some of my force vector design layouts as well if that's your kind of thing. Thank you for watching, and hopefully we'll see you back again soon on the Walter and Claude channel.